welcome back. Or if this is your first time here, thank you for joining us in the quietest moment of the day. Tonight, as the lights dim and the world drifts into silence, I'll take you to a small medieval village. A place without phones, without clocks. Just soft moonlight resting on thatched rooftops and dusty roads. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to wake up in that world? To open your eyes in a time long forgotten, where life moved slowly and the stars still told stories? Let's take a slow walk together. Feel the stillness, listen to the past, and let your mind gently drift towards sleep. If you enjoy peaceful journeys like this, feel free to like or subscribe so you won't miss the next step through time. Ready? Then let us begin. Now. You gently push open the old wooden door. The hinge creaks as if it too has just awakened, exhaling a long, weary sigh. Welcome to medieval life. A dim, hazy morning light spills in. No electricity, no bedside lamps, only the faint sun filtering through the mist, slipping between the gaps in the reed walls, tiptoeing across the still cold earthen floor. You blink slowly. The room still carries a lingering smell of smoke, mixed with dampness and body odour, what villagers here fondly call the scent of life. Outside, the narrow dirt path is still muddy from last night's rain. A hen darts past your feet, clucking as if to say good morning. In the distance, the hacking cough of a man echoes through the fog, heavy, drawn out, as though his lungs are trying to expel winter itself. You shiver slightly. You follow a narrow path behind the house, not for a morning stroll, but to relieve yourself. There is no bathroom, no toilet, just a deep pit behind the stable, shielded by a few crooked planks and some dry branches awkwardly leaning together. You pause, weighing your bodily needs against your dignity. Biology wins. But that's not the worst part. As you crouch, trying to maintain balance, you realise there's no toilet paper. People here use leaves, or old scraps of cloth, once a shirt, then a rag, and now destiny. Some elders say fireplace ash works wonders too. You exhale. Not out of relief, but because you now know you're officially an alien in this world. Of course, unless absolutely necessary, I'd rather say goodbye to this toilet altogether. And about you? Beside the pit is a wooden bucket giving off a pungent stench. It's fermenting, sour, sharp, and uniquely potent. This is their natural detergent made from aged urine. Sometimes they even gargle with it. You cover your mouth, holding back a cough from shock, not sickness. Back from your morning wanderings, you notice a little girl sitting quietly by the porch. Her body is thin, hair tangled, dark circles under her eyes so deep you can almost feel the sleepless nights etched in her skin. In her small hands is a fabric pouch. Inside, dried mint leaves. She brings it to her nose gently, as if the scent might soothe something invisible coiled tight in her chest. But the cough returns, dry, rough, unrelenting. Here, pneumonia has no name, no diagnosis, no antibiotics. It's simply called the sick spirit. And when that name is whispered, people fall silent, accepting it as part of life's natural rhythm. There are no doctors, no oxygen tanks, no thermometers, only herbs, whispered prayers, and a fragile hope that tomorrow will come. In this place, belief heals more than medicine, and hope is the final remedy to which all cling. From afar, you hear a low hum. A crowd has gathered in front of an old stone house. You draw closer and learn that someone has passed away. The house is quiet, wind slipping through the gaping wooden slats. Through the window, you see a woman lying motionless, her face pale as ashes. Beside her, an old man burns dried leaves. The sharp scent mingles with murmured chants, like a lullaby for a soul just departed. No one cries. Here, death is no stranger. It arrives quietly, like morning mist across a thatched roof, then fades, leaving behind a calm emptiness. You remember your own bouts of fever, a pill, a bowl of hot porridge, a warm blanket, a deep sleep, and you'd be fine. Here, a fever is a one-way path. There is no return. Back at the little house, the smell of lemongrass, mulberry leaves, and turmeric rises from the hearth. The old woman of the house is boiling water for a steam cure. You're invited to try. The warm vapour drapes your chest, softening your breath. For the first time that day, you feel comfort. A fleeting moment of ease in a harsh world. Outside, the mist has lifted. The sunlight now reveals every crack in the earthen walls, every wrinkle on the old woman's face, every sparkle in a child's eyes. Life here seems too fragile to survive, and yet somehow it does. Resilient, persistent. Near the edge of the village, tucked among small trees, stands a thatched hut belonging to a strange woman, known to villagers simply as the herb crone. Hair silver as ash, eyes clouded with time, her hands always clutching dry herbs and chicken bones. The hut smells of mint, mugwort and smouldering wood. On the table sits a bowl of dark water, with a few leeches slowly gliding through it. They're used to draw out bad blood. Here medicine is a blend of belief, herbs and rituals older than memory. You didn't miss here? Yes, leeches. You'd probably shudder at the thought. Having them feed on your skin would be unthinkable, unless, of course, it was your last hope. What about you? Would you let one cling to your arm? When night falls, there are no lamps, only flickering flames, the chirp of crickets, and coughs echoing softly from low-roofed homes. No one hurries, no one rushes to a hospital. Each cough is met with quiet acceptance, like the beat of life itself. People pray in silence, hoping the sick will still breathe at dawn. The next morning, you head out not to work the fields, but to help dig a grave. A woman, only 36, didn't survive a long fever. No coffin, no mourning garb, just a few prayers, a fresh mound of earth, and a misty morning. Death here is no tragedy, is a rhythm, repeating like harvests, smoke from kitchens, or roosters at dawn. That afternoon, you're invited to a healing ritual, actually an exorcism for a neighbour's cold. They draw a circle in ash, burn onion peels, and knock a coconut shell gently against his forehead. It's bizarre and almost comical. You struggle not to laugh. Here, healing doesn't have to work. It just needs to feel like it might. You return to the straw hut, lying back on a worn mat. The air smells of smoke, damp straw, and people. Your soft bed and sun-warmed blanket at home now feel like a distant memory. Still, you're lucky. At least, you're alive. Tomorrow will come, and with it, more surprises. Because just when you thought things couldn't get any stranger, you'll discover what they eat every day in this place. You wake in the dim light of an early autumn morning. There are no car horns, no scent of fresh coffee. Instead, you're greeted by the smell of dry straw, wood ash, and something bubbling softly in a chipped clay pot by the hearth. You step outside, your feet brushing against the cold earth. Your stomach growls. But here, hunger isn't an emergency. It's a daily companion. What's for breakfast? Not toast with butter, no chia oat granola mix, certainly no glowing green smoothie. Here, breakfast is a thin millet porridge, cooked with the leftover water from last night's boiled greens. If luck smiles on you, there might be a pinch of salt. If the stars align, maybe even a few wilted onion stalks. You lift the steaming bowl to your lips. No spoon, just a sliver of sharpened wood. Across the room, a child sits cross-legged on the dirt floor, sipping their porridge slowly, eyes gazing dreamily through a crack in the door. You blow gently on yours. The rising steam carries an earthy, musty smell. Not appetizing, but enough to quiet the hunger gnawing at your gut. In modern times, people count calories, track carbs, sort proteins. In the Middle Ages, they count grain stores. Food isn't for pleasure, it's for survival. You eat to live, not live to eat. For the poor, meals are as humble as they are repetitive. Black bread, thick porridge, boiled wild greens, and if heaven is feeling generous, a sliver of lard. Meat? Not likely. Fresh milk? Dream on. Sometimes they boil tree bark when the hunger becomes too sharp. In colder regions, turnips and onions are loyal companions. When spring arrives and wild herbs sprout, the village salad becomes a curious blend of dandelion leaves, young nettles, and wild mustard flowers. No sesame dressing in sight, of course. I'll wager that if you had to eat this way for a week, you'd never again complain about not knowing what to eat. Those weekday dilemmas of fridge staring would vanish in a heartbeat. The elders say, as long as your belly's full, you're fine. Delicious food, that's a privilege of the nobility. Those who dine with silver knives, ceramic plates, and embroidered napkins. You once thought nutrition was scientific. Vitamin A for eyesight, iron for strong blood cells. But here, nutrition is folklore. Red turnips, heat the blood. Dry beans, keep bad winds from settling. Stale bread is gentler on the stomach than fresh. There's no proof, only belief. And that's enough. Midday arrives with the faint sound of a church bell ringing somewhere far off. You glance around and see people gathering firewood, stoking flames, preparing the main meal. Not out of luxury, but because it's the only meal that might feel a little full. You help tend the fire, watching as the old woman tosses a few turnips and bits of stale bread into a pot of grey water. The smell that rises is sharp, almost sour, but no one complains. Because here, this watery soup is considered a feast. As the pot begins to boil, children gather around, each clutching a chipped bowl, waiting eagerly for their share. The medieval human body is fueled by what one grows, finds, or shares. There are no supermarkets, no delivery services, only soil, calloused hands, and the hope that winter won't be too cruel. Meat is a rarity, almost absent from a peasant's daily life. Only on holy days, or when someone dies and leaves behind a chicken, does the village feast. The meat is then hung above the hearth, smoked to a leathery toughness so it lasts for weeks. People eat it in slivers like treasure. A single pork chunk in soup, no bigger than a fingertip, is enough to send children squealing with delight. Here, food isn't measured by grams or calories, it's measured by season. What grows is what's eaten. Some years, heavy rains rot the root crops, and the entire village survives on bread made from finely ground husk and ash. It causes stomach pain, but starvation hurts worse. Adults chew the softer bits and give them to children. You, meanwhile, gnaw on what feels like crushed gravel. Dinner is the meal of ash and exhaustion. Everyone returns to the fire, building it again from sticks gathered earlier in the woods. Once again, porridge is cooked, thicker this time. Everyone needs fuel to make it through the cold night. No candles, no television, no warm tea. Only the dim red flicker of the hearth, the rustle of straw, and a quiet bubbling from some corner of the room. You sit with your bowl in hand, realizing that although the food is meagre, it brings people together. Every shared bowl, every exchanged glance over a scrap of turnip, it's not just nourishment, it's community. And what about drinks? You may picture a wooden keg of foamy beer, a glass of rich red wine, or mountain spring water caught at its purest. But reality has other plans. You're sitting by the fire after a long day digging soil with the villagers. Your throat is parched, your lips cracked from wind and ash. You glance around, hoping for a cool drink. No such luck. Instead, you're handed a wooden bowl of warm, cloudy, sour-smelling liquid. Beer, someone says. Yes, it is beer. But don't expect anything bubbly or cold. This is small beer. Barely more than fermented barley water, with 1-2% alcohol. Not intoxicating, not fragrant, but at least safer than well water. Why? Because in the Middle Ages, water was dangerous. No filtration, no chlorine, no awareness of bacteria. Wells, ponds, even streams could carry anything you didn't want in your mouth. Mud, refuse, animal waste, floating corpses of rats. So instead of plain water, people drank anything that had been boiled or fermented. Beer was the star beverage of medieval Europe. But not the golden, glass-poured kind with a foamy head. No, this was brewed in clay pots, stored in wooden barrels, and drunk from shared wooden bowls, or straight from the hand. There were two kinds. Light beer for the poor, the elderly and children, with just enough alcohol to kill germs and soothe the throat. Strong beer for festivals and the upper class, potent enough to make your knees wobble after a few bowls, and often the cause of weddings turning into bar brawls. In many villages, women were the main brewers, known as alewives. They guarded family recipes, adding herbs like mugwort, dill or rosemary to cool the liver or ward off evil spirits. You thought daily beer drinking was a modern indulgence. Nope. In the Middle Ages, it was a survival strategy. If beer was the drink of the countryside, wine was the symbol of cities, churches and the elite. In warmer regions like southern France, Italy and Spain, grapes were cultivated and pressed, but not into the refined wines you see in films. Medieval wine was often sour, cloudy and diluted with warm water or spices. Clergy used wine in sacred rituals, but don't be fooled. They drank it outside of service too. Quite often, in fact. Wine was also seen as medicine, mixed with cinnamon, ginger or honey to treat colds. Every sip was a gamble, healing or tipsiness. In colder regions where grapes wouldn't grow, people fermented other fruits, apples and pears. Apple cider and perry, pear wine, became everyday drinks in England and Northern Europe. The wild apples used were often sour, tough or wormy, but they'd be smashed, juiced and left alone for a few days. Voila. Alcohol. No one measured ABV. Those who drank too much slept in the hay. Those who didn't walked back to the pig pen just fine. Villagers believed cider cooled the liver, brightened the eyes and cleared the skin. Was it true? No one knew, but it was still safer than the well. You might be surprised to know that tea existed in Europe long before colonial trade. Not black or green tea as you know them, but infusions made from mint, fennel, chamomile, nettle leaves, licorice root. These weren't called tea. They were herbal water, used to soothe stomachaches, ease headaches, or take the place of a whispered prayer. The elderly, pregnant women and the sick often drank them, not for taste, but because it beat drinking filth. In monasteries, monks kept hundreds of herbal recipes. Did they work? That depended on your patience or your superstition. Beyond all these, certain villages had drinks so strange they bordered on terrifying. Liquid from curdled cheese, fermented rice water after 7 days, cow urine. Of course, no one encouraged these, but in times of famine, anything you could drink and not die was considered acceptable. So perhaps now you'll think twice before wasting that clean glass of water. Sometimes, what's most abundant is what we value least, until it's gone. Food is one thing, but what about the weather? The next morning you're not woken by an alarm clock, nor by warm golden sunlight streaming through curtains. You're woken by a single ice-cold drop of water falling squarely on your forehead. One drop, then two, then a whole series of them, dribbling down in rhythm, from a leaking patch of thatched roof right above your bed. It's hard to imagine a time when you might get rained on inside your own house. Everything around you is damp, from the old wool sweater hanging off the bedpost to the cat curled up miserably by your feet. The cat's soaked too, and gives you a look that says, "What sins did we commit in a past life?" In this era, the phrase, "home is where you rest," can be misleading. Wind, in the Middle Ages, is not just a weather condition. It's a roommate, a lullaby singer. It slides through every crack in the clay walls, sneaks under the patchy thatched roof, and slips right through all 3 layers of your clothing like a dagger through paper. There's no glass in the windows, no cement in the walls. The house is made from a mixture of mud and straw moulded by hand. Some homes have only 3 walls, the 4th temporarily left for next season, when there's more time and less frost. The wind doesn't knock. It strolls right in, kisses the back of your neck with icy lips, and whispers like someone breathing beside your ear. You burrow deeper into the patchwork covers, if you can call them that. Thin, tattered fabric stitched together from scraps, letting the cold pass through as easily as butter through a knife. Every night becomes a negotiation between, should I pull my feet in under the blanket, and will I end up smelling someone else's feet? There are no private rooms, no locked doors, no concept of personal space. A typical peasant home includes 1 main room, living room, kitchen and bedroom, all in one. A loft, if you're lucky, for storing smoked meat or straw for winter. A small attached pen, not for a car but for the pigs, and if the house gets crowded, the whole family might sleep in there during the rainy season. Sleeping together is perfectly normal. 1 big bed, a pile of straw and dry leaves as might fit 5 to 7 people. Parents, kids and sometimes extended family. When guests arrive, the bed expands, by no one daring to roll over. On cold winter nights, warmth doesn't come from a fireplace, there isn't one, but from the person next to you. If someone wraps their arms around you at 3 a.m, don't get the wrong idea. They're just freezing. These days, people fuss over homes. How stylish, how spacious. Beds must be king-sized. Bedrooms must be 30 square meters. But our ancestors, they survived with a single bed, some straw, and the collective body heat of their entire family. Winter in the Middle Ages wasn't described in poetry. It was measured by how many people died of cold and pneumonia. No space heaters, no electric blankets. Many households had only a single fire pit, and that was for cooking, not warming, because who had enough wood to burn for comfort? Fires were lit using dry sticks, straw, and sometimes dried cow dung. It burned slowly, and yes, the smell? You'll get used to it. There were no chimneys. Smoke stayed inside. The entire house became one giant nose-singeing steam chamber. Adults coughed. Children had perpetual runny noses. The elderly curled up like husks of grain, praying spring would come quickly. As for clothing, it wasn't changed daily, because most people had exactly 2 outfits, one to wear, and another to wear again. Laundry waited until summer. There were no seasonal fashion lines. Clothes were only discarded when they were torn, mouldy, or beyond repair, and even then they were repurposed. So if you ever find yourself staring at a full closet and still moaning, "I have nothing to wear," just remember, having 1 or 2 outfits means fewer decisions. Now go check your wardrobe and comment to Sleeping History. Are you a fashion devotee or a minimalist at heart? Now let's step into the rainy season. Here, rain is not romantic. No umbrellas, no raincoats, just a worn-out woolen hood and straw shoes that soak through after 5 steps. Thatched roofs block out the sun just fine, but rain turns them into a leaky showerhead. People scatter pots, buckets, and even hollowed gourds across the house to catch the drips. The floor is packed dirt. When it rains, it becomes a kind of soft chocolate. You walk and leave footprints, and then notice someone else's prints coming toward you. But wait, you're at home. Who's been walking around? Ah, it's the chicken. In the Middle Ages, animals and people lived together. Why? To keep everyone warm, and to keep thieves out. So in your cramped, damp little house, you'll live alongside chickens sleeping on roof beams, occasionally fluttering down, scattering feathers in your face, pigs snoring by the hearth, sometimes climbing onto your bed if you fall asleep first, dogs guarding the door, but mostly just scratching themselves. Cats chasing mice and stealing food when you're not looking. By night, the soundtrack of your home is a rustic symphony of clucking, barking, snorting, and someone snoring like a war drum. Makes you love your modern bed a little more, doesn't it? Here, good weather is a foreign concept. Spring means mud up to your knees. Summer brings swarms of flies. Autumn cuts your skin with wind. Winter makes the entire village cough in unison. In the Middle Ages, weather wasn't something to enjoy. It was something to endure. Too much sun. The fields dry out, too much rain. The roots rot, too much wind. The roof flies away, too much snow. No one can even leave their bed. There were no forecasts, only Granny saying, "The rooster crowed thrice this morning. A storm's coming." And when night falls, it's really dark. No electricity, no lamps, just the fire's glow and maybe a tallow candle made from pork fat and smelling like burnt hair. Everyone huddles by the fire, no one ventures far, because beyond the doorway there's nothing to see. You curl up under your blanket. You hear the wind whistle through the roof. You hear a cat wailing. You hear footsteps, or someone's teeth chattering in the cold. And suddenly you realise surviving harsh weather isn't nearly as simple as you once thought. And gosh, your air conditioner? A true modern-day miracle. No matter the era, social hierarchies always existed. Today, even if we don't have as much money as others, our human rights and civil rights remain the same. But back then, you'd quickly realise just how hard life was at the bottom of the ladder. In the Middle Ages, not everyone lived the same. Some people slept under woolen blankets, some slept next to cows, some ate with silver spoons, some ate with seashells. And all of this was clearly categorised under one name, class. Those at the top weren't just standing on a hill. They owned the entire hill. They were lords, dukes, counts, and people of noble blood. Though in truth, everyone's blood was red. The only difference was they had more wine in theirs. The nobility lived in stone castles. No leaks, but somehow colder than clay huts. The walls were meters thick, strong enough to stop arrows, but not the snoring of guards on night duty. They wore long robes trimmed with fur. Every step trailed a metre of fabric. Grand, yes, but perfect for tripping over. They didn't put on their own shoes, didn't scratch their own backs, and never, ever touched a turnip. Their meals included meat, lots of meat, chicken, rabbit, deer, wild boar, but no forks. Forks hadn't arrived yet. They ate with their hands and tossed bones on the floor for the dogs. Each morning, they heard Bible readings in Latin, even if they didn't understand a word. What mattered was someone read it for them. That was nobility. Right below them were the servants, guards, maids, chamberlains, cooks, gatekeepers, shoe shiners, fly swatters. Each noble had a shadow of staff behind them, although that shadow was often stepped on. They lived in the outer buildings of the castle, ate leftovers from banquets, and wore patched-up clothes made from their master's old garments. Many even took on their master's surname, a daily reminder, you are not your own. They woke before the rooster crowed, because the noble's rooster slept in. They had dreams, but rarely ones where they were the hero, because their lives weren't theirs to live, they were made to serve. In the countryside, you'd meet peasants, the people who carried society on their backs only to get kicked in the rear. Peasants didn't own land. They rented it, or were allowed to work on it by the lord. Each year they paid with a portion of their grain, a chicken or some eggs, and sometimes a wife, if the lord invoked the right of the first night, jus prime noctis. They lived in mud huts, ate thin porridge, and wore clothes patched over and over. Their children didn't go to school. They were needed in the fields. They couldn't read, but they could read the sky to predict rain, watch chickens to predict wind, and read their wives' faces to predict storms. Their entire lives were an endless cycle of seasons. No holidays, no birthdays, no paid leave, only sow, plant, harvest, pay up, And below the peasants came the serfs. They didn't just lack land, they lacked freedom. A serf could not leave the lord's estate without permission. If they married, they had to notify the lord. If they had a child, that child automatically became the lord's property. Serfs weren't slaves, but they weren't free either. They were considered part of the farm, alongside the cows, the pig pens and the well. When the landowner died, an inventory of property was made, and the serfs were listed right next to the livestock. If lucky, they were transferred to a kind new master. If not, they kept sowing under cold rains, softly singing lullabies as sad as the soggy soil. How lucky we are to be born in a time where we belong to ourselves, where we have choices, rights, and the chance to work for our dreams, not someone else's birthright. Alongside the civil hierarchy stood the church, a class of its own. Priests, monks, bishops. They didn't just pray, they governed land, collected taxes and passed judgment. They didn't pay taxes, they were exempt from military duty, and they could read, in a world where 95% of people couldn't. That alone equaled power. They preached sermons, taught children, read wills, and acted as lawyer, doctor and judge was all in one. They decided who was saved, who was damned, who must repent, and who needed to pay more for absolution. Yet here you are, free to study, to choose your path, to declare who you are. You think that's normal? It isn't. In the old days, justice didn't exist in the dictionary, so take a moment, appreciate what you have. History is a mirror, and it shows us how far we've come. Not a farmer, not a noble, not a priest. Then maybe you were a craftsman, a blacksmith, cobbler, weaver, or candle maker. You'd live in a village or town, join a guild, and pass your skills to your sons. You had talent, maybe even invention, but couldn't set your own prices. The guild decided that a good blacksmith might forge swords for knights, but wear the wrong colour tunic, you could still be fined. Then there were those not listed on any social chart. Wanderers, travelling actors, storytellers, musicians, beggars. They had no land, no family name, no one who'd record them in the town register. They came, bringing laughter. They left, carrying rumours. They lived off spare coins, scraps of bread, and a farmer's kindness, or a noble's scorn. But they were the ones who carried culture from place to place. They remembered heartbreaks, great tragedies, and tales of old, through song, through verse, through flute tunes warm as sunset. You think life here means no job, no pressure, no meetings, no office drama? Sorry, in every era, work exists. No work, no food. There are no alarms, only the scraping of a broom outside the hut and the clang of someone banging a pot. Time to get up. You crawl out of bed, scratch your head under your soot-covered hood, and slip on wooden clogs. No face wash, no brushing teeth, just a lazy spit and off you go. Forget makeup, forget outfits. Now ask yourself, would you still complain about going to work? Your first job? Peasant farmer? You didn't choose it. It chose you. When you were born holding a clump of dirt and your ancestors' debts. You're bound to the land like a toxic relationship. The more you try to leave, the deeper you sink. Each year, you pray. No drought, no flood, no rats eating the harvest before harvest. You plough with oxen. If there are no oxen, your wife pulls the plough. If your wife is in labour, you pull it yourself, your hands are calloused, your fingernails pitch black. You don't even remember the last time you cut them. You learn to plant by the phases of the moon. You read clouds for drought. You offer eggs and salt to the earth spirits, because if the ritual's wrong, they say the plants won't bloom. And you realise, hey, you do know things. You work from dawn till dusk. Your back curves, your skin burns, your hands are always muddy or smoky from the hearth. No one praises you. No one calls you a top farmer of the month. But if you take a single day off, no one eats. Maybe you raise livestock. Your home includes chickens, pigs, cows, ducks, and mice. You eat beside pigs, sleep beside hens. Eggs are laid under your bed. Pigs curl by the fire. Cows munch hay beside the door. You learn to listen to their cries to spot illness. If the chicken wheezes, you boil lemongrass. If the pig won't eat, you chant a spell, or just take it outside. You've delivered baby goats with one hand while holding your toddler in the other. No one taught you. You learned by doing, by failing. No milking machines, only your hands and patience. If the cow kicks, you're injured. If the chicken pecks, you bleed. But you keep going, because cow's milk is breakfast, eggs are lunch, and if you're lucky, pork is for New Year's. As a tailor, your clothes have been mended over 10 times. A sleeve tear becomes a bunny patch. Your pants have no button, just string. You learned sewing from your mother. She learned from her grandmother. No school, just a bent needle and a tangled thread pile. You dye with turmeric, soapery, oak bark. Each wash fades the colour until one day your shirt is nearly see-through. You stitch at night by oil lamp. Eyes sore, hands trembling. But you persist. Winter is coming, and someone needs something warm. No one thanks you. No one sees your sleepless nights. But when they wear the coat, they feel comfort, and you feel quietly proud. If you're a man, maybe you're a blacksmith, carpenter, or potter. You forge knives for the village, make nails, hooks, door hinges. Day after day you inhale smoke, hear endless hammer strikes, until your ears ring and your back bends like a fishing hook. You build tables, chairs, houses, sometimes coffins, which you test yourself to reassure the buyer. No safety gear, burns, cuts, lung infections. Just part of life. You treat it with herbal paste, drink stream water, and keep going, because there's no such thing as a day off. You wake before the rooster. You knead dough by hand. You check the oven by ear. No thermometers, just instinct. Each batch of bread is a gamble with the fire god. You brew beer from barley and malt. The beer is weak, but safer than well water. The whole village drinks beer, even children. At first, it feels strange, but then you get used to it, because if you don't, you'll go thirsty. You have no title, no salary, but you wake up first, sleep last, and work the hardest. You cook for the whole family, do laundry for the whole clan, give birth, and cut your own cord. You raise chickens, milk cows, teach kids, deliver babies, mix herbs, light fires, and patch clothes. You're not allowed to get sick, not allowed to complain, not allowed to rest. They call you someone's wife. But you know, without you, everything collapses. You don't need applause, but maybe one day you'd like to just sit still. Just one day. In the evening you sit by the fire. Your hands are raw, your shoulders ache, your eyes blur. No reports, no emails, no KPIs. But you've just finished the longest workday of the century. You survived. You know, tomorrow it begins again. Work, pain, exhaustion. No one asks, "What's your dream job?" Just one quiet question behind tired eyes. "Will we have enough to eat tonight?" So now, are you still complaining about your job? You work in an office with AC set to 24 degrees. You resent your boss. You grumble about low pay. You want to quit. But if you were doing those jobs, how long could you last? In our world today, women and children are often prioritised. But what about in the Middle Ages? Let's take a closer look and see just how different things were. You've probably heard stories about knights, kings, and glorious battles from medieval times, but few people tell you about those who didn't carry swords, didn't ride horses, and yet quietly kept every home from falling apart. The women. Women in this world didn't go far. They belonged to the kitchen, the cradle, and the cold water bucket on a winter morning. From a young age, they were taught how to cook, weave, mend clothes, deliver babies, and, most importantly, how not to disturb men. They learned to smile just enough, stay quiet just enough, endure just enough. A woman who was too independent was seen as peculiar, and in those days peculiar meant dangerous. Most women couldn't read or write. Knowledge was seen as unfitting for the female mind. Letters, books, and even independent thought were considered corrupting to a woman's virtue. If a girl longed to learn, the only option was a convent, where books served God, not self-discovery. Those who dared to read, heal with herbs, or live alone were often branded as witches. And witches were burned. Marriage was a fate, not a choice. Many girls were married off at 12 or 13, not because they were grown, but because their families needed a solution. Marriage wasn't about love. It was a transaction, traded for a patch of land, a cow, or simply one less mouth to feed. Brides didn't choose their husbands, and they had no right to refuse. To object meant being called ungrateful, blasphemous, or a disgrace to God. Women had no property of their own. Upon marriage, they brought a dowry, which instantly became the husband's. They couldn't appear in court alone, couldn't sign contracts, and if they were beaten, the law sided with the stronger party as their husband. A wounded wife was often blamed for failing her duty, and the greatest duties was to bear children. On average, a woman gave birth to 6 to 10 children, but not all of them lived, and not all mothers survived their first delivery. There was no anaesthesia, no nurses, no doctors, only a midwife, a dull knife, a few herbs, and a hope thin as smoke. Some gave birth in winter, with the fire long dead and the husband drunk at the tavern. Some died before they could see their child's face. Religion at this time was not always a comfort. Sometimes it was the very wall that imprisoned women. They were taught that women were weak, easily tempted by the devil, and therefore must be controlled. A woman who lived alone or behaved outside the norm could be labelled a witch, even if all she did was brew tea with mint leaves. A whole village might gather to burn an old woman just because she kept a cat and lived quietly. Some women chose the convent to escape a life of forced marriage and endless childbirth. There they could read, write, and reflect, but always under the church's strict gaze. Knowledge in the convent did not liberate. It was closely watched, carefully rationed. Noble women might seem luckier. They learned to read, wore fine clothes, had influence. But they too were married off according to political schemes. They were pawns in the great chess game of kings, wed to quiet enemies or secure alliances. A few, like Eleanor of Aquitaine or Joan of Arc, rose beyond the mould. But they were rare exceptions, not the rule. In every social class, women were taught that silence is a virtue. They were not allowed to laugh loudly, not allowed to speak when their husbands were speaking, not even allowed to refuse intimacy, even when they were ill. Obedience was expected, not just in behaviour, but in thought. And yet, strangely enough, they were the ones who kept the village alive. They cooked meals, told stories, raised children, healed wounds with tree bark and faith. They preserved life in a time when death lurked behind every bush, rode in every cold gust of wind, and echoed in every child's cough. No one wrote their names in history books. No one carved statues or engraved tombstones for them, but they lived, endured, and loved, like the fire in the hearth, not blazing, not glorious, but warm enough to keep an entire dark age from freezing over. And then you think about feminism. Yes, that word you hear so often today. Women now enjoy rights that were once unimaginable, and those rights were won through generations of struggle, through pain and resistance, as the world slowly turned and changed. Today, gender equality is a fundamental part of a just society. But back here, to be born a woman meant to carry the full weight of injustice and hardship, simply for existing. And now you may be wondering, what about the children of this era? Were they cherished, spoiled, and cared for the way children are today, where families often revolve around their little ones, fulfilling their every request, afraid they might fall behind their peers? In this world, where sunlight rarely pierced the thick clouds and straw roofs stained by time, children were not truly children. They were born amid kitchen smoke, bellowing cattle, and the cold breath of dawn. No cradles, no soft blankets, no record of a first day on earth. Before they could even stand steadily, their tiny feet were already trudging through mud. By 4, they learned to carry water. At 5, they knew how to light a fire. By 6, they were watching younger siblings chasing chickens, herding pigs. Time was not for growing up. It was for surviving. There were no scheduled playtimes, no dedicated playgrounds. Games, if any, were played in the cowshed or atop piles of hay, where seashells became swords, onions became balls, and a small pebble might be treasured as a trophy. These children had no toys, but their imagination was richer than any library. Joy, when it flickered, rarely lasted, usually interrupted by the distant shout of an adult, calling them back to reality with a tone that allowed no protest. No one comforted them when they cried. No one asked if they were tired today. Tears were seen as a sign of weakness, and weakness could not survive the frostbitten fields or 6-month winters. Love, if it showed itself at all, came through a slightly less burnt slice of bread, or a patched-up pair of shoes just good enough to last the cold. Not in hugs, not in lullabies. Knowledge was a luxury, reserved for those who didn't have to work. Poor children didn't learn to read, never touched ink or paper. Their first lessons were how to milk a cow without getting kicked, how to wash pots without breaking them, how to dodge a beating when they made mistakes. Wisdom didn't come from teachers. It was etched into their knees and hands, in scars that whispered harder truths than any book. In places where monasteries still stood, some children were sent there for moral cultivation, not to develop themselves, but to be shaped and moulded according to religious codes. Silence was praised, obedience was rewarded, mischief was seen as sin, and daydreaming was a slippery path to moral downfall. There were no birthdays, no cakes, no gifts, just another year gone by, if they managed to survive it. Children here did not look forward to growing older, because each passing year brought them closer to duty, to punishment, to arranged marriages. Childhood wasn't something to be cherished, it was something to be endured. Little girls were trained to be wives before they even reached puberty. They learned how to stay silent when scolded, how to smile when called upon, how to accept the hand of a stranger who would be theirs for life. Fabric took the place of books. Cooking pots replaced ink and quill. Dreams, if they existed at all, were folded up and tucked beneath threadbare wool scarves by the hearth, a place that doubled as their bed and the only space left to dream in. At night, children huddled together, asleep on beds of straw in low-ceilinged, damp rooms. There were no night lights, no bedtime stories, only the wind whistling through the cracks in the wall and the soft pop and hiss of a dying fire, a lullaby no one sang aloud. Sometimes they dreamed, not of far-off lands, but of a single morning when they wouldn't have to get up early to light the fire. And yet, among the mud and smoke, these children carried a strange kind of light within them. They learned to love by sharing the last crumbs of bread, learned to laugh when they won the best onion from the garden, learned to accept, endure, and grow up. Far too early, but with no other choice. No one taught them how to dream, and yet they still knew how to tilt their heads and gaze at the moon. No one told them they were precious, and yet they still tried their best to be useful. A medieval childhood had no pastel hues, no nursery rhymes, no carefree laughter. But it was in that very absence, in the quiet, in the cold, in the relentless demands of survival, that a silent symphony of resilience was written. A symphony made of mud, of wind, and of small hands always reaching out to hold on to life. Now ask yourself, if modern children were dropped into this world, how many would actually make it through? And yet today, with free schooling and loving homes, many children still dawdle, still grumble when asked to do the smallest task. Sometimes we have to wonder, are we spoiling them too much? Perhaps alongside giving our children everything they need, we must also teach them to be grateful, teach them how to work, how to help their parents with small tasks around the home. If we overindulge them, They may grow up thinking everything they have is owed to them, and worse, they may begin to expect even more. By now, you might think things couldn't possibly get worse, but just wait. Imagine witnessing a brawl, a violent fight, blood spilling onto the ground. Naturally, you'd expect the police to arrive any minute. You wait, but no one comes. Confused, you begin to wonder, where are the laws? Who's keeping order here? The truth is, in this time, laws weren't written on parchment for common folk to read, because common folk couldn't read. Instead, laws lived in the mouths of men, passed down from father to son, from landlord to peasant. They were hidden in phrases like, "Your father did it this way, now it's your turn," in the silent shake of a judge's head beneath a stone roof, and in the eyes of a wife who'd been beaten with no one stepping in. There were no patrolling officers, no defense attorneys. Guilt was decided by reputation, status, and sometimes luck. Those accused had to prove their innocence through pain. A blameless soul would not burn when walking over hot coals. An honest person wouldn't die if they drank holy water laced with a mild poison. And if they did die, it was blamed on the devil. You may think it sounds absurd, unjust, full of superstition. But here, this was justice. In such a world, religion wasn't just a comforting presence. It was a silken rope that bound tightly. Every village had a church, modest, cold, and more solemn than a lord's hall. Inside, people heard more sermons about sin than hope, more tales of hell than heaven. They bowed their heads and repented for things they weren't even sure they'd done. Religion back then left no room for questioning. Every explanation began with, "Because God wills it." Death by disease was seen as punishment. A poor harvest meant the villagers weren't devout enough. A lightning strike on a cow barn. Someone had committed adultery. There was no space for science, only space for fear. People went to church not just out of faith, but out of fear. To skip Mass was to risk excommunication, a punishment worse than imprisonment. It meant being severed from your community, stripped of your right to live among others. The excommunicated couldn't buy, sell, or even be buried in consecrated ground. No one dared look them in the eye for more than a few seconds. Religious laws crept into every meal, every stitch of clothing, every whispered word between husband and wife. No meat on holy days, no sharing a bed during fasting periods, no going outside after sunset without permission. Women had to cover their hair, men had to lower their heads when passing the church. Infants had to be baptized early, or else, if they died, their souls would be barred from heaven. In religious trials, there was no physical evidence, only accusation. A woman healing with herbs was labelled a witch. A widow living alone was rumoured to be sleeping with demons. Anyone who dared question doctrine was swiftly branded a heretic. There was no forgiveness for those who were different. A single wrong word, and you could find yourself tied to a stake in the village square, burned alive to the sound of applause from a crowd that believed they were doing God's work. Civil law wasn't any more forgiving. Strike a noble's animal, lose a hand, steal bread, go to jail, fail to pay taxes, get fined. And if you couldn't pay, they'd take it from your body. A 10-year-old child who stole an apple could be punished like an adult. There were no appeals, no leniency. Justice was not blind. Justice saw very clearly who was rich and who was poor. Those with land had a voice. Those without were labelled burdens upon God. For women, the law was almost non-existent as a form of protection. A husband had the right to beat his wife within acceptable limits, but those limits were never clearly defined. A wife who dared to resist could be labelled as rebellious, a crime nearly as severe as adultery. In some cases, a woman who was raped was forced to marry her rapist in order to preserve the family's honour. The law was a stick. Religion was the reins, and the common folk were the draft horses, unaware of where they were going, only knowing they had to keep walking or they'd be whipped. And yet, Amid all that, there were still moments as tender as morning mist. An old woman who could read, hand-copying scripture for little girls. A kind priest who quietly hid a single mother from the prying eyes of the church. A rare ruling that sided with the powerless. But these moments, as beautiful as they were mere flickers in an age shrouded in darkness. In the silence of nameless villages, among the echo of church bells and the damp, musty smell of courthouse halls, people lived as if always being watched, not by the law, but by a God who always seemed to be frowning. And so, day after day, they bowed their heads, not out of faith, but because not bowing meant not surviving. By now, you're probably thinking, there's no way I'd survive more than a few years here, right? And you'd be right. Life expectancy here was heartbreakingly low. While modern times have seen human lives extended thanks to medical advances and technology, things were very different back then. In this world, people didn't measure age by years. They measured it by seasons, by the harvest that survived drought, by the number of loved ones buried, by how many times they stood at the church doors holding someone's hand, only to say goodbye forever after a single fever in the night. Here, making it past the age of 40 was rare. Living to 50, that might just get your name mentioned during Mass. Not to honour you, but as proof that sometimes death simply forgets a few people on its rounds. You see, in your time, 40 is just halfway. A time of career stability, family peace, and clearer direction in life. But here, 40 means you're close to the grave. You're already among the elders. You pass by an old man sitting outside his cottage, hair silver and eyes cloudy like a misty dawn. Some say he's 60. Others claim he's only 50, because his back hasn't completely hunched yet. No one knows for sure. Birth certificates don't exist, and memory fades like a candle flickering in a windowless room. Life expectancy here wasn't a number drawn from statistics. It was the sum of dry fields, dirty water, mouldy bread, and the trembling hands of a midwife. A child could die from a cold. A mother might not survive her third childbirth. A healthy young man could perish from stepping on a rusty nail, with no medicine to save him. You walk past the village graveyard, where simple markers stand quietly in rows. No birthdays, just names if you're lucky. Many graves bear only a wooden cross, sketched in haste, now blurred by the rain. Some belong to infants, only 2 days old. Some to mothers who didn't make it through labour, and very few mark lives that made it past 40. Inside a mud house, you see a woman lying motionless. She's only 31, yet already has 4 children and a heart as frail as cooled ash. When people here say, old woman, they don't mean age. They mean weariness. Eyes grow dim not from time, but from never resting. Hands tremble not from age, but from anemia and the absence of hope. No one here ever retires. People work until they can no longer stand. Then they lie down, waiting for someone to bring them thin soup and a handful of straw to rest their head on. Death doesn't knock with a bell. It arrives with a cough, with a wound that won't heal, with that crushing fatigue even while the sun still hangs high. You may have thought that a human life should be long, but here, a girl might become a mother at 13, and a memory just past 20. People grow fast, die young, and live as though each day might be their last. Life expectancy here isn't a straight line. It's a series of broken threads, where the lucky live long, and the less lucky are buried young. There are no doctors, no hospitals, just whispered prayers and a few leaves from the forest. Sometimes, a blister is a death sentence. Sometimes, a sneeze is a warning. To start preparing the coffin. You pass the village well and see an old woman resting nearby. Her smile is as quiet as a passing breeze. Some say she's seen the snow fall 60 times, but she herself doesn't remember clearly anymore. In her memories, only the sounds remain. Crying, wind, and the cawing of crows on nights when someone dies. Here, living long is not always a blessing. Sometimes it means loneliness. It means watching every loved one depart, every season drift by, while each new ache in your body no longer has a name. And the reason people's lives were so short in this time is disease. Illnesses that seem manageable today could wipe out entire communities back then. Speaking of disease reminds you of just 4 or 5 years ago, the days when COVID swept the world, bringing loss and fear. How fortunate we are to have come through that, still here together, listening to Sleeping History's quiet stories. It reminds us, in any era, plague is always terrifying. You think of the Black Death, the Marseille plague, leprosy, malaria, and a chill runs down your spine. No one knew where disease came from. Some said it rode the wind. Others blamed cats. Some believed it was punishment for sin. But one autumn morning, before the sun had risen, the village awoke and found the blacksmith's house sealed shut. He'd been fine just the day before. That evening he had a fever, and by morning all anyone could see was the smoke from his hearth. No hammering sounds, no coughing like gravel. A few children came to call him, but found only his body, cold as river stone in winter. Around his neck were black blotches like ink stains, ink no one had ever seen, but everyone feared. Then it was the neighbour, then her son, then a newborn child. Death no longer moved quietly, as it had in years past. It now walked in clear steps, from rooftop to rooftop through every door. No one had time to understand what was happening. All they knew was fear, and when people are afraid, they look for someone to blame. You pass through the village market, once lively with vegetables, fabrics, laughter and haggling, now as empty as an unfinished dream. A few carts roll by carrying bodies, their wooden wheels clacking like bones knocking together. On the carts lie limp forms covered in burlap, or sometimes not covered at all. You see a mother sitting on the ground clutching her child, the baby burning hot with fever, lips pale like cold ash. She whispers prayers, refusing to let anyone touch the child, because if death comes, then at least let it come in her arms, not in an isolation tent on the forest's edge, where the sick are left to wait for fate like vendors wait for a market crowd. The plague came fast, but left slowly. Each day, a few more gone, and over time, people stopped crying. They dug graves with bare hands, wrapped the dead in old cloth, and carried them out in silence. Only the church bell still rang, steady, tired, like the priest himself was starting to burn with fever but hadn't dared lie down yet. One night, you dream of coughing. You wake in a sweat, only to realise the coughing is real, but not yours. It's from the house next door, and the house beside that. In the dark, coughs echo like funeral drums. People begin to draw charms, paint holy symbols, hang crosses made of onions. Some even hang dried fish on their doorposts, believing the stink would drive away evil spirits. You want to laugh, but then you remember, when there are no medicines, no knowledge, faith is the only thing left to keep panic at bay. You reach a hut far outside the village, where a woman has been cast out for her fever. She lies alone among dry grass and scraps, her eyes cloudy, her skin blackened as though scorched. You bring her water. She looks at you and smiles faintly, a smile with no blame, no hope, just a soft period at the end of her story, as if to say, thank you for still seeing me as human. Weeks pass. The plague retreats as suddenly as it came, without warning. Cool winds return. Children dare to play in the yard again. Bread rises once more in ovens. But the village is no longer whole. A few laughs are missing. A few silver-haired heads no longer gather by the fire. A few voices that once promised to finish that winter tale are forever silent. The plague only left when it had taken half the town. And so, life continued. Not because people forgot, but because they got used to it. To loss, to unnamed grief, to the knowledge that plague always returns, next year or in 10 years. You exhale deeply. In the stillness, you suddenly understand. In the Middle Ages, disease wasn't a stranger. It was an old visitor and who came now and then, and every time, took a piece of the world with it. No matter the era, plague is always dangerous. That's why it's important to equip ourselves with knowledge, to protect our health, to protect those we love. Only after walking through fear and danger can we truly appreciate the gift of the present. So please, take care of yourself. Be joyful. Be kind. After all, we only get one life in this world. And if you ever feel lost or burdened, don't hesitate to share with us. We'll be here, walking with you, whispering softly at night, keeping watch while you sleep. You return to your little cottage, sit by the fire, and remember all the stories you've heard. Here, age is not measured in years, but by how many times people get to sit together, by how many winters pass without losing someone, by how many nights pass in peace, without coughing, without wailing, without the echo of hammers shaping a coffin. Then a curious thought crosses your mind. So, how did people in the old days entertain themselves? No TikTok, no Netflix, no YouTube, no Google, not even a soft couch to stretch out on lazily. Yet somehow, amidst the dry days ruled by duty, in the fog and the long dragging winters, medieval people still found ways to laugh. Not loud, thunderous laughter like in fairy tales, but small, quiet chuckles, tucked away like wildflowers blooming between the cracks in a stone wall. Entertainment, in a world with no electricity, no movie theatres and no holidays, still existed. Just not in any way we might imagine. Villagers didn't have much free time. They worked from dawn until the sky turned black as ink. And if there was any strength left in their bones, it was just enough to sit by the fire and sigh. But it was in those moments of weariness that little joys crept in, like smoke slipping between the roof tiles. Sometimes joy was simply listening to an old man spin stories. Stories with no ending, stories no one knew if they were true, but that kept being told again and again, as if the world was trying to soothe itself. Tales of goblins, of girls who turned into foxes, of ghosts that wandered the woods after failed hunting seasons, all wove themselves into the minds of villagers like a thin blanket on a cold night, not warm enough to protect, but just enough to let you dream. The village fair was a rare spark in the year. No tickets, no speakers, just a line of cloth flags strung across the kitchen, the smell of scorched bread, the sound of bamboo flutes slightly out of tune, and spoons clanging against pots like battle drums. Women wore brighter clothes than usual, still homespun linen, but dyed in colours saved for such days. Children were allowed to run free as long as they didn't spill the ale. The men drank too much before noon, then sat around singing songs no one fully understood. And everyone, from the nearly toothless grandmother to the not yet plumed young girl, had at least one reason to smile. Entertainment wasn't separate from religion. Many festivals were tied to saints, to harvests, to Lent. People didn't fully know why they had to fast on certain days, or refrain from laughing on others. They just knew that, if they didn't, something invisible, or the priest and his willow stick, might punish them. Still, during those bustling St. processions, there was something almost magical in the air. People were allowed to walk among a crowd without bowing their heads, to light candles without being asked why, to forget, just for a little while, that the cold had crept deep into their bones. And then you wonder, did they even know what mental illness was? In our modern world, depression and anxiety seem to always be present, like background noise in the back of our minds. Some might say it's because we have too much comfort, too much free time, and so our thoughts begin to spiral. And others might argue, no, mental struggles have always existed across all ages. Only now we have the words, the care, and the space to talk about them. What do you think? Share your thoughts with Sleeping History. We'd love to know. The truth is, the medieval soul didn't die from hardship. It simply curled inward, like a hedgehog protecting itself from the cold. Many sought comfort in old folk songs, never written down, never scored, only passed from voice to voice, trembling through the generations. These songs spoke of forbidden love, of fathers who never came home from war, of a girl who turned into a bird to escape a forced marriage. Each melody was a small window into a soul that had no name in the history books, but still lived and remembered. Folk games, if they existed, were simple. Kicking around a pig's bladder, wrestling, blindfolded goat tag. These required no props, no training, only one thing: you had to still be breathing. Some villages held storytelling contests, laughter duels, to see who could keep a straight face longest, or flute-playing competitions using chicken bones. The prizes were humble, a handful of roasted chestnuts maybe, but the pride lasted all winter. In the most remote villages, a few people painted on dirt walls, with charcoal, with ashes, with longing. They weren't called artists. No one hailed them as geniuses, but they painted anyway. A cow, a woman weaving, a house they dreamed of living in someday, not to display, just to remember they were still human. And there were dreams. Each night before sleep, many people prayed, not aloud but with a long, aching silence. They dreamed of oceans, even if they'd never seen salt water. They dreamed of sleeping through the night, uninterrupted by church bells or crying babies. They dreamed of hearing music, real music, not spoons on pots. They dreamed of freedom. In a world where everything was limited by hunger, cold, or power, entertainment was not a luxury. It was nourishment for the soul, a quiet reminder of what made them human. It lived in the evening's quiet song, in the shy laughter of a woman who had never been called beautiful, in the sparkle of a child's eyes as they held up a blade of grass like it was a royal sceptre. Amid a harsh, cruel time, people still found a way to laugh, even if it was quietly, inwardly, and perhaps that was the most extraordinary thing of all. And so, our journey into the medieval world comes to a close. You've walked through misty mornings, through nights without light, through scorched meals that still somehow tasted of kindness. You've sat by the hearth, listening to ghost stories, being rubbed down with ginger root, wearing a pumpkin on your head as the village god. And you've learned this: no matter how poor, how harsh, how absurd life may be, humans always find a reason to laugh, to hope, to love. Now, you can close your eyes and let those memories drift away, like the last curl of smoke from an old fire. Outside the night might be cold, but within you there is a little village, still glowing with warmth, wishing you a peaceful sleep, where there are no winter ghosts, only gentle dreams, soft as the rooster's crow at dawn. Good night. We'll meet again in another corner of memory in a long-lost time, where you are once more a stranger, just arriving in the village.